Well, here we are with Jedd Medefind. We're so grateful that you're here with us. And Jedd, we're so thankful that you can be here with us on this live event. And I wanted to just kind of dive right in and ask you, what have the biggest challenges been in this season? We're kind of coming out of COVID a little bit, but what have you seen from your point of view, the biggest challenges for families and organizations after these past few months?
Yeah. Well, I think it has been a very challenging time. I think we can all just start by acknowledging that. And, in many levels, there are these macro things, these big things that are challenges. And then, it's disease and it's the economy and it's jobs and it's fears of personal loss, all of those things. But I think that one of the things that we could say is most universal across just about everyone is a certain level of anxiety, of worry that maybe few of us have felt before in life. And I would just confess that myself, that there has been a kind of a certain gravity or a tug, a pull towards anxiety and worry. And I'm not talking about, kind of this intense clinical level anxiety, but almost more like a low grade fever, that subtle pull towards worry and rumination and concern that maybe nibbles at us. Like if you imagine little mice nibbling at your feet, and you just feel it a lot of the time. And I know for myself, David, and I think this is true for a lot of dear friends that I've talked with as well, there's the continual choice all throughout the day of things we could worry about. I think that's especially true if we turn on the news, if we look at social media, there's just a constant invitation to worry and anxiety. And unless we choose otherwise, we can literally go down that road and just start ruminating over and over again on those things. So I see that as one of the most pervasive and biggest challenges of this time. And it is really a challenge to the church to say, can we, as God's people, be a people of peace amidst an age of anxiety, both for our own sake in the sense of walking in peace and in joy, but also being people of peace and calm for a world that is caught up in anxiety? Can we offer God's peace to the world? I see that as one of the great challenges of this particular moment.
Wow, that's really deep, and I appreciate you being vulnerable in that sense and allowing us to see in the life of a leader. Because I think sometimes we idealize like, oh, the leaders, they must be steady and they're not going through any of the same things that we are. But I think it's a general and universal situation that we're feeling, and I think that's very true, to be those beacons of peace. So thinking of being that peace in this world. Could you maybe talk about some small steps or some investments or things that we can do to literally be that in the world?
Absolutely. Well, and I'll start with this, David, is just we need to understand the stakes. What is at stake when we talk about anxiety and worry? Because, of course, there's the very obvious level that anxiety and worry make us miserable, right? So there's that, right? There's the personal consequences, and it makes us and those around us feeling uptight and anxious, and it robs the joy out of our lives that God intends for us to live with. So that's certainly a big part of it. But there's also the reality that anxiousness and worry turns our thoughts inward. Yeah. It makes us consumed with ourselves. Actually, psychologists tell us that a person in an anxious state is focused pretty much exclusively on what they sense as the source of their threats. So that might for us be worry about disease, worry about losing certain things or people we love. It might be economic worries, losing our job, not being able to raise funds for things or other things. Whatever our anxieties, we're focused and consumed with those. And so we're crouched and defensive rather than living in the way that God, I think, calls us to, which is open-handed, open-hearted, which is joyful for us, but also how we engage the world, how we serve, how we listen to others, how we care for them. And so I think that is what is at stake. And that is why these small things we're about to talk about matter so much.
Yeah. No, that's really important. And I think it's almost like that pursuit of anxiety is anti-gospel, it's anti-kingdom of God, where we're just kind of constantly looking in. And that's kind of the world, or the message that our world is giving us. The answers are within you. So what are those small things that we can do, or what has been working for you, or what would you suggest to others that they do?
Yeah. Well, so I think ultimately there are deep spiritual things at stake here, and we're going to get there in a moment. But I would also really emphasize that there are also very physical things at
Yeah.
play here as well, right? And I think sometimes as Christians, we feel like we need to race past the physical and just talk about spiritual things. But you think about when Elijah was himself exhausted and anxious,
Mm.
and God, he had just had a wonderful victory, but then he was fleeing from Jezebel, and God finds him there, and he's just spewing out what really is anxiety, and it's understandable. He feels very isolated and alone, how we kind of feel sometimes.
Mhm.
But the first things that God does for him aren't actually remind him of spiritual truth. The
Mm.
first things God does for him is feeds him and puts him to sleep.
Yeah.
And so I do think that some of these very tangible physical things
Yeah.
are vital, because God made us as physical beings. That wasn't like a secondary thing, that we're just spirits and then he had to put flesh on us. No, he made us flesh and spirit, and that's meant to be
Mhm.
intertwined, just as it was in Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
He came in the body. And so the body is real. It has consequences. God cares about it. And so, I would mention a few specific things. I think one of them is simply just getting enough sleep. If we aren't, if we're watching television until, midnight and then waking up at 6, then just getting a little more sleep can make a big difference. Secondly, I'd say time outdoors, if at all possible. And a lot of different psychological studies show this. Simply being outdoors, and of course, ideally in nature, if there's a way
Yeah.
to get to a park, or to be even better, out in the countryside or on a mountain or volcano, there is actually, humans just are refreshed by being in God's creation. And of course, we shouldn't be surprised by that as Christians. But so, adequate sleep, time in nature, and then exercise. And I'm not talking about, going out and running 10 miles. I'm saying just walking. And again, study after studies are showing this, that it's actually for exercise to make a difference in our lives. It doesn't need to be long and intense.
Yeah.
Just being, getting out of our chair regularly makes actually a really significant difference. And then doing things like, going for walks,
Yeah.
can make a big difference. So for me, that means, throughout my workday, most of the time I'm at my desk, but actually I will try to have blocks of time where I'm actually out walking. And I can do that on the phone. That, that works for
Yeah.
me with my particular work. Doesn't work for everyone, but maybe for you, it might be, in the morning, maybe with your spouse, instead of having a conversation in the morning or the evening with your spouse over at the coffee, over the table, or, having coffee, do it on a walk, go, those sorts of things. And so I would just emphasize that although the physical is not the most important thing, those types of things, getting outdoors, moving our body in a little bit of exercise, getting adequate sleep, those things can make a very significant difference.
Yeah, and I really like that. I think we tend to really separate or polarize those things, the flesh, our body, and the spirit. But I think God really does find beauty in that coming together. And so that's really incredible. I think there's small things you're saying too. You're not telling us that we have to work out for 2 hours a day or do something incredible. These are really small changes that we can implement starting today. So kind of going a little bit deeper though, what are some different maybe more spiritual or even kind of emotionally minded practices you think that we should be focusing on this time?
Yes. And so I think this is really significant, David, because for two reasons. First of all, there is the issue of being reminded of what is true, right? Because the truth is, in the swirl of all the noise and these screaming headlines and social media, all the anger and anxiety and envy that we find there, we can forget what is true. And so simply being reminded of that is hugely consequential. And that really is indeed spending time outside of the noise, in the presence of our Father and in His Word, and being reminded that although the world may be upside down, that God has all of history in His hands, that He has us in His hands, and that even if things are very broken, that all will be well. All will be well.
Yeah.
He will set all things right. He will wipe away every tear. And so we can live in the present, even amidst very difficult situations, with that peace, with a joy, with a sense of purposeful labor in the present. And so the reminders of truth that come when we step out of the noise and attend to God's voice, to his word, are
Mm.
immensely significant. I would say there's something equally significant or deep that comes alongside the truth, though, right? The ideas or the accurate understanding of things. There is simply the reality that when to truly calm a human soul, most of all requires being in the presence of a calm soul.
Wow. Yeah.
We've all experienced that, right? That when we are anxious and wound up, the most calming thing is to be with someone who themselves is calm. And not in an oblivious, I have no idea what's going on calm, but a sense of, I know what's going on and I am still. And there's a confidence and a depth there. And of course, we can receive this from another human being, but most of all, we can receive it from our Heavenly Father, whose heart always is calm.
Yeah.
And so those times, and we see this on a human level with a baby and its mother. Actually, recent studies have shown that a baby's heart rate synchronizes with its mother's heart rate within just a matter of seconds. When they lock eyes, the mother and the child's beating heart slows and synchronizes somehow in ways we don't totally understand with its mother's heart rate. And I think the same is true when we spend time in quiet alone with our Heavenly Father. Our heart rate can synchronize with him.
Huh.
And it's something that goes beyond just the truth, right? It's the truth, but there's a peace that surpasses or is deeper than understanding, than the knowledge alone. And I think that is the peace that comes when our heart synchronizes with our Father when we are in his presence.
Yeah. And I love what you're saying, that God is not aloof or indifferent or unaware of what's going on, but he doesn't lose his sense of peace and his sense of being steady. And we can tune into that if we so
Yes.
desire, and also be that source of comfort for others, that we can be that steady source for others.
Absolutely. And of course, the world so badly needs that right now, right? And so if we can be that presence for others, I think that is one of the most precious gifts that we can give. Yes. Well, and so David, just taking this all a step further, so let's make this really practical. Like, well, how do we do this? Well, I would just personally recommend, once again, small choices. What we could call habits, or another thing we could call them is rhythms, right? Just like a beating heart, a heart contracts and then it expands. It contracts and expands. That is a God-intended rhythm to give us life.
Yeah.
And I think he has also rhythms that he intends for our daily and our weekly and yearly habits, these rhythms of contraction, meaning laboring, working hard, serving others, and then release, which actually is what it's that resting, and it is actually literally the opening of our hands before our Father so he can fill them. Yeah. And so I just really encourage a daily rhythm of saying every single day, and hopefully, at the same time every day, because that rhythmicness helps us keep that habit. Yeah. And for me, David, that means the first thing each morning. And so the way I actually do it, and I think I've shared this with you before, is about half hour before I go to bed. So this starts in the evening. I'll turn my phone off. That way, the last thoughts of my day are not anxious thoughts driven by, what's in the news or work-related emails. My mind is starting to slow. I can spend that time with my wife. We can have a conversation. I can ease into sleep. Then when I wake up, I don't turn my phone back on until I've spent some time in the presence of the Lord. And like we were talking earlier, both being reminded of those profound truths, but also just hopefully with my heart synchronizing with his before I go into the day with all of its tumult and noise. And hopefully when I do that, I have some of his peace to offer to a world that is so anxious.
Yeah, and I love that imagery of, and like it says in Hebrews, to keep our eyes fixed on Jesus, and to think of that imagery that spiritually, but even physically, I'm sure, our heart rate will kind of go down, and we'll have that peace that we can give to others.
Yes, and I think it does happen physically too.
Yeah.
It's spiritual, but it is my heart rate is actually slower, I think, during the times and even throughout the whole day when I have indeed been in the presence of my Father and attended to it. He's always there, right? Yeah. But so often the noise and the tumult, we in our finiteness can't see it and sense it our heart can't get into rhythm with his because of all the other noise. So that time away and in a daily rhythm, I think, is so critical.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think we've kind of started in the physical sphere, the spiritual one. If you can talk just for a minute about maybe socially, how have you seen the change in the community aspect? Maybe its importance, or how we can, again, find those small adjustments in our lives to keep tuned into community, which I think is a deep need that we have as well.
Yeah, that's a great question, David. And and I think every single person's situation is so different, right? Like some people, if you're single and you're living in a high-rise apartment in a city, like you are just profoundly isolated. If you're living in a family in the countryside and you're with your family and you're in the country, there's a little more relaxed. You're with neighbors, maybe. It's a very different experience for everyone. But I do think that what you're alluding to, that the reality that we as humans were designed for relationship. Yeah. And isolation, and this is again confirmed by psychological studies, isolation produces and grows anxiety and depression. Yeah. And it has very deep impacts, and not just psychologically, but physically. There was one study recently that found that actually a regular experience of isolation, meaning like that you're living with a pervasive sense of being lonely, was actually worse for your physical health than smoking 15 cigarettes a day.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy? It affected your physical health more than smoking 15 cigarettes per day. So it tells us isolation is not ideal. It is not good for man to be alone, as it says in Genesis, right? And so while I think it is vital that we actually have times of intentional solitude with our Heavenly Father, just like Jesus did, we also need to be intentional about time with others. And of course, that's going to look different for different people right now. And some of that may have to be through Zoom and and other mediated means. But of course, as much as possible, I think we need to say we need this as much as oxygen, as much as food, as much as water. And so we need to find ways to be in fellowship with others, and particularly with fellow believers, just joyful fellowship, prayerful fellowship as well.
Yeah, and I think that's important what you said, that we're looking for a kind of a certain quality of fellowship too. We're not talking about just kind of talking about the news, which could foster more and more anxiety. We're exposing ourselves to people that are, like you said too at the beginning, those people who maybe found that spot also of being calm in midst of the storm.
Yeah. And I would that's spot on. Yeah. Personally, as our family, we have quarantined, but we quarantined with two other families. So there were two families in our neighborhood, and they made the same commitments to try to really be safe and cautious, but we would be together with each other. So that has made a huge difference over the course of the past many months. Second, we recently have we have a back deck. And so we've been inviting some friends over for meals outside. And, we felt like that's an appropriate level of caution, but we've said it's not healthy for us not to have that fellowship. And we've particularly invited a lot of single people to that, because we know they're in particular in need of that fellowship. It's been a joy and blessing to us, but it's also, I think, been really good for them.
Yeah. No, and I can imagine. And just kind of putting it's so biblical in nature, right? Like, this is nothing new. This isn't some idea that you just thought up, right? Like, this is like what God has established from the beginning. And I think it's becoming apparent in a new way. And I'd like to shift just for a minute. We've talked a lot about kind of the personal aspect, and even the importance of community within that personal aspect. But as the leader of an organization, you've kind of had to make some pivots and some adjustments, and there's been a lot of nuance in this season. Could you maybe speak just to the leaders who are listening to us, maybe about the most important things that you've seen in these past few months of having to get used to a new reality and thinking about a new reality that is to come?
Yeah. Well, I'll address that on two levels, David. I think, on a more organizational leadership side, I do think that it's very important that all of us as leaders recognize this is not a phenomenon that we just need to wait out a little longer and then everything goes back to normal. What lies beyond COVID, whether that's, a few weeks from now or months or longer, however long it is, will be a very different reality than was before. And in some of the ways that may be really good, actually. I think, for instance, work will, I think, less require everyone to go into an office. There will be more flexibility for time at home with family and those things. That's positive. There'll probably be less airplane flights for work than there were before. That's overall good, But there will be other things that will affect various industries deeply. And not just if you're in the airline industry, all of us, I know for CAFO, for instance, a big part of growing a movement has been getting all of the diverse parts of that together in one place from all over the world. And that's been a wonderful joy. We pray we can go back to being able to do that. We don't know if we'll be able to do that. And so we're building out other ways to interconnect the movement. And I would add for us, very significantly, that is not primarily just about knowledge. It's tempting to say what matters most is that we get good knowledge out there, knowledge about parenting and trauma and all these, organizational leadership, fundraising. We are doing that. But what we also see is that at least as necessary as that content are the relationships that can form around the content and as leaders learn from each other, right? So as our model is being rethought, as we're rethinking these things, we're thinking a lot about how do we cultivate small groups of leaders learning and practicing together. So that's one of the ways we're rethinking our work and those sorts of things. But I think all of us need to approach our leadership that way, saying the future is going to be different. We don't know what it's going to be, but how are we beginning to strategize about a different future even now? So that's on the macro level.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. And I think what you're saying too, that even that perspective, that change of mindset, not saying like, oh, things will never be the way they were, and just kind of staying there and, but thinking, okay, this is the new reality and we can make changes and maybe even on some levels it'll be better. And I really like that you pointed out the things that will honestly be better on the other side of this pandemic. I think that's really important to have that perspective.
Yes. So, those are the macro level leadership things, but I would say just as important, actually I would argue more important for our role as leaders is actually not those high level leadership vision things, but actually those very small choices that you and I were talking about earlier, and I'll say this, and this kind of brings us to the theme that CAFO has been just really building on each year, David, is that I have become utterly convinced that the most significant choices we will make in our lives, you and me and every human and every leader, the most significant choices we will make in our lives are the small daily decisions that we make, each day. Because, the big decisions, right? Strategic plan and who you marry, where you're going to live, all those things, those things are certainly consequential. But at the end of our life, what is most going to have shaped the person that we have become and the impact that we have left in the lives of the people around us, what will shape that most are those small daily choices. Do we rush past people, or do we pause and we really attend and listen? Do we remember what they say? When my wife and I have a little conflict, do I just kind of get mad and walk away? Or do I pause and then make sure I've understood? Like those little tiny watersheds, at first they seem incredibly small. Over the course of years, they become opposite sides of the Grand Canyon. Wow. They really do. Those little tiny choices. And so I would emphasize it really is, it's wonderful because it frees us from worrying about the big things.
Yeah.
I mean, as much as it's important for us to be visionary about what may lie beyond COVID, you and I can't figure that out. We're guessing at best, right? And we might get some things right and some things wrong. But if you and I are making small daily choices to spend time in the presence of God, to control the place of technology and screens in our lives, to spend time outdoors in nature, to go on little walks, to be present and good listeners to the people around us. If we are doing those little things, then good fruit is going to grow in our lives. We will be more peaceful and joyful. The people around us will be impacted by that. Good things will grow up in the organizations where we're serving. The children or families that we're perhaps caring for in our programs will sense that we love them. When those things are true, good fruit's going to come, whatever the future may hold. And so that's why I say that the most significant thing are those small choices we make every day.
Wow, thank you so so much, Jedd. And I think that's kind of what we want to summarize what we said, that those small things really do matter. And I thank you for your leadership on this and kind of setting that vision. And it's not an obvious one. I think people really want to hear the big, loud, like, go here and do this. But that just to focus on the stillness and the importance of those micro decisions, I think is really important. I think it's really important. But thank you for being with us, Jedd. I don't know if there's any final thoughts you want to send out to the people who are hearing us across Latin America.
Well, I would just say I rejoice in what I see God doing in and through ACH in Guatemala and other Latin American countries. It is just clear that something beautiful is stirring. Mm-hmm. And what a joy for all of us to be a little part of something big that God is doing. I don't think there's anything better this side of heaven than being a little part of something big that God is doing. It's clear to me that is happening in Latin America. I love being a little part of it too, and I really do believe if each of us within our own little spheres, within our families, are making those small daily choices to seek God, to be present with Him, to love those around us well, if we're doing those little things, then the big things, God will take care of that, and it's going to be amazing.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you so much, Jedd. I appreciate that, and we're going to hold on to those thoughts. And I encourage everyone who's listening just to meditate on that and think about what small things you can do today that will make a big impact in the future. But thank you for being with us, Jedd. We appreciate it.